So, sorry about being gone for so long, everyone, but the world sort of caught on fire, and I just felt like sitting in a corner and rocking back and forth for a few months. But now I'm back, and I'm here to kick some butt at Wild Canyon. Now that the obligatory joke is out of the way, let's start talking about Sonic again, We're getting back into the main series for a few issues, and oh no, they're back. Remember way back in issue like 2 or 3? Those two weird reality warpers that Sonic met when we went into a dimensional warp zone for no adequately explained reason? Well, apparently somebody thought it was time to bring them back, and also shove in some love for the Sega Saturn while they were at it. Rest in peace, you silly Sega box. I do actually really like this cover. It's composed real nice, with Sonic and Tails on the inside of a warped TV, looking out at Al and Cal as they fight over a controller in a room full of junk food and soda, and now I'm wistful for my childhood. Man, I miss being a slob. Actually, no, I don't. Al and Cal don't look too bad with more detail, though seeing their flesh fold and warp like this is kind of off-putting. But then there are other details that I just love, like Sonic's fingertips pressed up against the glass there. That's actually a pretty cool effect. We open on Sonic and Tails dashing around the plains as Sonic monologues about the fact that, since the Ultimate Annihilator went off, there have been a lot of strange sights and sounds around the planet lately. Like, for example, that horrifying lava lamp-looking portal right in front of them. Before Sonic and Tails can get away, the zone seems to pull them inside, into this crazy modern art piece, though it doesn't take long for him to remember that he's been here before. Before he can explain, though, there's a great big explosion knocking Sonic and Tails down. We're then introduced to these horrifying things who refer to themselves as Horizontal and Vertical. They then monologue, unprompted, about what happened to them, how they used to be the best of friends, just playing around in their wacky, physics-less dimension. But when the Ultimate Annihilator went off, their zone was basically completely decimated, and then rebuilt from the ground up, including them. While they survived as primordial beings, apparently still sentient enough to remember what they used to be, the two of them developed into these weird robot entities, very powerful, but completely at odds at each other now, locked in a war for total control of the zone itself. That's actually pretty damn brutal. These two were completely harmless, if a little annoying, and they've just been morphed into these battle-lusting, distrustful robotic monsters. Sort of a metaphor for the changes in the comic overall, to be honest. They decide that, since they can't seem to defeat each other, they'll enslave Sonic and Tails and force them to fight one another, with the victor taking the zone for themselves. And they do just that, even outfitting Sonic and Tails with weapons and armor that make them look like rejected Image comic characters, each one representing one of the two robot overlords. The two of them fight for a while, sharing some back and forth in what is actually a fairly decent fight scene, though it lacks tension because you know that the two of them aren't in any real danger. But it is nice to see a fight sequence that's actually fairly easy to follow for once, ironic considering the hodgepodge dimension they're in. Sonic manages to get the upper hand and is about to spin dash right through Tails when the two of them just suddenly snap out of it. Seriously, it's so instantaneous that I thought I'd skipped a few panels at first, but yeah, the two of them just sort of realize that they're still friends and then boom, they're fine. Then Al and Cal make their presence known, and Sonic remembers how they used to be. Both Sonic and Tails try to convince Al and Cal that friendship is the true magic, and that maybe it would be better for them to try to go back to the way things used to be. The two of them even briefly consider it, before immediately turning on each other and trying to blast each other out of existence. Sonic and Tails decide that, well, they tried, and maybe it would be better to just try and put some distance between themselves and the fighting before they end up getting hurt. An explosion behind them somehow manages to eject them out of the same zone portal that they were originally sucked through, and while Tails does point out that it's kind of sad that the two of them will probably be fighting each other for, well, basically the rest of time, Sonic doesn't care. Kinda cold, honestly. The story is pretty good for the thematic implications that it gives off, but it's not all that well told. I think it was a smart decision to revisit Al and Cal again and show just what sort of extended damage the Annihilator did. It's definitely a lot more interesting than the whole not whole is now 3 hours ahead of everyone explanation they've given before, because this actually shows real consequences for what happens when a zone's structural integrity is just decimated. It's just a shame that the explanation is delivered to us via a monologue by Al and Cal, when it probably would have worked much better if it was delivered later in the story, after Sonic and Tails broke free of the mind control. Like, keep Al and Cal in the shadows from the beginning, watching the fight from afar, and then have them show up when Sonic and Tails are freed, and then deliver their backstory, when Sonic actually asks what happened to them. Speaking of Sonic and Tails breaking free, boy was that abrupt. Like, the cheese factor is in full swing here, and they basically break free thanks to the power of friendship, which is perfectly fine for something as cheesy as Sonic the Hedgehog, but it just sorta happens. There's no build-up, no lingering, they're just fighting, and then they're not. And Sonic just sort of brushing off what happened so callously seems a little out of character to me. The story was written by Mike Gallagher, and at this point in the comic, he was only an occasional contributor, so that might be the reason why Sonic and Tails seem a little off in this one. And also the story's breakneck pace, too. Gallagher wasn't really one for character writing, if I'm being honest. He was more someone who focused primarily on comedy rather than characters, and when he's not doing that, his writing is not that good. Looking back, it wasn't terribly good to begin with, but it was a flat-out children's comedy comic back then. But it does show why Gallagher's writing just sort of didn't fit with the comic at this point. In terms of art, I like what they've got going. Of course, the background work is all over the place since we're in a warped zone where physics don't really matter, but it just sort of looks like a really busy museum piece. The characters are kept simple, but they do look on model for the most part, and I do kind of like Alan Cal's redesign. They're fairly generic giant robot looks, but the designs do go out of their way to reflect the whole horizontal versus vertical thing they've got going on, and each of them looks particularly squashed and stretched, which I do like. Art duties were handled by Art Mawini, Jim Amash, and newcomer Lisa Irasi on pencils, inks, and colors respectively, and it all looks pretty good. Not amazing, I don't think, but I think it looks pretty good for the story it's trying to tell. The story overall really does feel like filler, though. Not terrible, but not memorable in any sort of way, either. So it's a good thing we have a backup story in this issue, because otherwise this one would be feeling pretty dang short. And we start off with the most extreme of 90s activities, skydiving. Princess Sally is leading a session with a team consisting of Rotor, Hershey, Loopy, Hamlin, and a horse. I don't think he's named or anything, he's just a horse. And when they land, Sally is greeted by a young boy and his mother who invite her and her team over for some dinner, which she accepts after locating a few of her other teammates who ended up flying a little off the beaten path. And then they go back to Mobotropolis, where Jeffrey assists the king in spying on his own daughter, while the king states that Sally's been avoiding him and he needs to talk to her, even if he has to have an armed guard escort her to him directly. Are we sure this guy still isn't possessed by the evil magician or being mind-controlled or something? Because once again, it's feeling like he's pretty inconsistently characterized here. No big surprise, honestly, considering that Ken Penders wrote this backup story, and while Ken's not good at consistent theming in a lot of his stories, one theme that is suspiciously prevalent throughout his time on the comic is shitty fathers being real shitty to their kids. It's one of the very few consistent things about his writing. And we've already seen a lot of examples of that, though King Max and Locke are the two real big examples of this, though others do crop up here and there. The point of this story is, of course, to set up for the next part of the story, and also to show that there's some tension with Max and Sally, which of course is only really brought to the forefront by Max at the very end of the story. Though we do get to see this brief bit at the front where Sally's floating down without a care in the world, glad that she doesn't have anything to worry about up here in the air. Though since it's been a while since we've seen Sally and the King actually interacting, it doesn't really do a good job of portraying any sort of tension here, which makes this 6-page long story seem pretty superfluous. I will say it's worth it for the art though. Manny Galan and Jim Amash handle the pencils and inks, while coloring is done by Ken, and as I've said before, coloring is probably the thing he's best at when it comes to art. It's kept simple in this story, save for some decent shading and gradients in the first couple of panels, but it actually looks pretty decent. As for the pencils and inks, well, they're okay, though there are points where they dip into a bit more detail than feels necessary. Like this back shot of Sally, which, okay, I know where your eyes are going, but I'm actually just staring at her arm, which looks really weird in this shot for some reason. It's kinda detailed, but also misshapen at the same time. There are a couple of things like that here and there in the story, but on the whole, the art is solid, most of the time. Actually, this is one of those stories where the more I look at it, the more weirdness I sort of discover when I'm going over it panel by panel. Like Lupe's weird nose and mouth locations in this shot, or how Hershey looks more like a short-nosed wolf than a cat here. And then there's this one-off boy and his mother, neither of which look particularly good here. Well, that's a bit of a disappointing issue to come back on. Had some good stuff going on here and there, but on the whole, it sort of felt like an issue that was just spinning its wheels, waiting for something bigger on the horizon. But we'll have to wait on seeing what that is, because we're gonna jump all the way back to Knuckles again, with the start of its next arc with Knuckles the Echidna, issue 13. I'll see you next time, everyone.